Hello and welcome to another episode of ResourceFULL. Now, this one is one I've been waiting to organise for a long time. When I started this idea to talk about resources and the importance of knowing how to use them, you can find a great resource, but you know how to use them. Now, this is one of the first resources I tried to get in touch with, and it's been a year. And a few months ago, I was pleased that a response came back to me. We'd been talking back and forth, and we're trying to organise it. I had a baby. Well, my wife did. And eventually we found a time. I'm so pleased because this resource really fits nicely. For those people watching it in England, it really fits nicely with the national curriculum, but it really thinks about mathematical thinking and reasoning. It's a resource that certainly here in the UK, not many people know about, although I have been told, actually quite a few people are downloading it, which is great to hear. Resource I'm referring to, well, it's twofold: Algebra by Example and Math by Example, created from the SERP Institute. And so I'm going to say, come on down to Allie and Julie. Come on down. Hello, both.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
No, well, thank you for getting in touch with me because I know I've been chasing, but you then got in touch with me to organise this, which is fabulous. So Julie Booth and Allie Weege, I practiced the name beforehand for just in case people watching now seeing the name on screen. It's Flemish, I'm told. Excellent.
Indeed.
First and foremost, tell us about yourselves, tell us about the SERP Institute, and then we'll start talking about the resource. So Julie first.
Sure. So I'm Julie Booth. I am a professor at Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the US. And my work focuses on cognitive psychology and understanding how students think and how, in particular, they think about math, and then how resources need to be designed to attend to how students think and to really capitalize on what we know about how students think in order to help them learn better. I've been collaborating with the SERP Institute, which I'll let Allie tell you a little bit more about, for almost, 13 years now, I think, from the beginning of the concept of Algebra by Example. But the SERP Institute is a fantastic organization that I, as a university scholar, have really benefited from collaborating with, and I really enjoy the work that we're doing. So I'll let Allie tell you more about the Institute itself.
Lovely. Allie, please introduce yourself. Tell us where you are, who you are, and where you come from.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Allie. I am at the SERP Institute, or Strategic Education Research Partnership. It is a really small nonprofit based out of Washington, D.C. in the United States. We work with university partners such as Julie and school districts to solve problems of practice that districts put in front of us. So one of the problems that we were trying to solve here was Algebra 1 mathematics and the achievement gap in Algebra 1. So we set out to create resources that could be easily integrated and used across many different districts and various contexts, and make them available for free. So all of the SERP's Institute resources are available online on our website, downloadable for free for anyone in the US or anyone across the globe.
Wonderful. And before we started recording, we started saying about that these resources are really quite easy to fit in no matter what your scheme of work, whatever your curriculum. You can take the page you need because that's the topic you need. It's not as if you're buying into a big system here. It's a concept which is quite consistent throughout, a consistent model of, and so part of what I want to discuss today is how to introduce it to the children, how to make sure that they challenge themselves to the thinking properly when given these kind of tasks. But they're all very consistent. They when you see it for one area of an algebra or number, the modeling, there have been 2 examples on page, will hopefully mean anyone can use these at their moment of exposition, of teaching, which is going to be fabulous. Now, obviously, you were talking about kind of the resource design, Julie. And as I just kind of referred to there, this is quite consistent, isn't it? So what's the benefits of, well, should we start seeing it first before we see the benefits of the design, or what do you think would be the right way to meet it? Should we go and look, or what do you think?
Why don't I tell you a little bit about the background so that you know what you're looking at when we open the resource. So as I said, my work comes from cognitive psychology, basically understanding how people think. And there are a number of principles out there that have been identified by cognitive psychologists to say like that these are particular things we know about students thinking. and particular ways that we can use that information to benefit their learning. And some of those techniques include the use of worked examples. So basically showing students a way that a fictitious student has solved the problem, or in our case, a way that a fictitious student has tried to solve the problem and failed. And having them study those examples can be better than having them just practice on their own. That's one of those cognitive principles. Another one involves self-explanation, which basically says that if they're explaining the information, the content that they're being meant to learn to themselves, they're going to learn it better, and it's going to be more, the knowledge is going to be more explicit. They're going to identify gaps in their knowledge and seek to fill them better if they're forced to explain what's going on, not just try to practice problems by rote. And then the third piece, which I sort of alluded to already, is this idea of learning from errors. So we do it in the sense of worked examples that contain errors, but there's a growing literature about the importance of using errors as a natural part of the learning process. And I'm not sure what the situation is in the UK, but I can say that in the US, it's been pretty well documented that it is not used very frequently in the US classroom. And in fact, teachers often shy away from showing wrong answers because they're concerned that it'll confuse students, especially students who struggle with the content, and that it might make them think that that's the right way to do it, or it wouldn't help them to learn the right way to do it. But there's actually a growing literature that suggests that getting students comfortable with seeing and evaluating errors as part of the learning process is really critical to learning. And some of our work indeed shows that it's especially important for those struggling students, the ones that the teachers in the US at least have traditionally been trying to sort of shelter from that. So the way that we've created these materials are, it's meant to be a replacement for the practice time that students all over the world spend in their math classes. So oftentimes a typical lesson is, teacher might show an example or two, explain how to do something, and then give the students a number of problems to practice on their own to try to develop that skill. We are recommending replacing that practice time so that it's focusing the students' attention on the content in a different way. So yes, they're still going to get some practice as part of it, but we've replaced some of those practice problems with examples, either correct examples or incorrect examples of how another student might have tried to solve the problem. And we ask them particular questions to direct their attention to parts of the problem that are particularly critical, like why would the student have done this, or where did this come from, to make sure that they're noticing the key features of the problem that really make the procedure correct or incorrect. So if Allie, if you want to pull up one of those examples, we can walk you through.
Wonderful. While we're waiting for that to come up, I think I'm recently been listening to Joe Bowler's Mathematical Mindsets, and I thought you might nod straight away, because a lot of what you're saying, I've been meaning to read it for a long time, but I now do it as my driving audiobook. And I'm hearing a lot of what you're saying there, that mistakes in the classroom should be cherished. They're an opportunity to learn from it. And we know more about the cognitive science than ever before in that instance. But I love the fact you talk about the discussion in the classroom as well, because I think it's a real shame when you walk into classrooms and everyone's silent and they haven't got the opportunity just to discuss, what do you think happened here and why? Oh, it's best if they're head down trying quietly for 20 minutes by themselves. A quiet classroom is a suspicious classroom. Yip, that's always stuck with me, that one. But here we go. So as I said, this format will look the same throughout these resources. Your turn on the right-hand side, and either an incorrect or a correct on the left-hand side. So carry on, Julie, please.
Sure. So as you can see, that this is, you can think of this as an assignment right here, or a page of an assignment that has 4 problems. This one has 2 pages, but instead of them solving all 4 problems on their own, the first problem that they would have solved is instead solved for them either in a correct or incorrect fashion. It's clearly marked. That's a really critical feature. There's some work early on in this sort of realm that came up with results that showed that the incorrect examples were not helpful, but it turns out it was because they weren't clearly marked as incorrect, and where the error wasn't clear to the students. So students who struggle, might just look at it and say, well, yeah, that's how I do it. So, and then they learn the wrong thing from it. So making sure that the students know it's an error and that they're supposed to be thinking about why it's wrong is really critical. So this is one of my favorites. It's a simple incorrect example, but the idea is that each of these examples targets a particular concept or misconception, a common misconception that students have about the particular content. So in this particular case, you have k minus 6 equals 3, and this fictitious student, Marvin, subtracted 6 from both sides to try to isolate the k. Well, of course, the issue here is that 6 is already negative. So, they've learned some kind of general rule about subtracting from both sides to isolate the variable, but they're not seeing that negative sign as part of the term. And so really they should be adding 6 to both sides, so because they're subtracting a negative 6 from both sides in order to isolate it. And it's so simple, but it is one of the most common misconceptions that we see in kids as they're developing algebraic reasoning, and that kind of maintains as they're learning algebra and beyond. And so it's fascinating to watch students work with these. And I'll, for example, I've had experience watching them work with this exact item and have them say, well, wait, no, that's right. Yes, they need to subtract both sides. They need to subtract the 6. Oh, and you can see that light go on where they realize that the particular feature that they were missing was the fact that the 6 was already negative.
So to reiterate,
and so,
sorry, Julie, just want to, I'm trying to think, because this exercise then really, I think we're reiterating it's important that the discussion between the pupils is given the opportunity. This isn't this isn't a great resource to be struggling by yourself necessarily. This has more potential with that. Well, what do you see as the problem? What do you see as the problem, and so on.
Well, and you're right. We actually have had gotten some anecdotal stories from teachers who have talked about how these resources have changed the discussion in their classrooms, how the students come with better questions and they have different things to ask about or to discuss. But even I don't want to make it sound like that the discussion has to happen. Yes, it would enhance it, but the student even working on this by themselves and trying to grapple with the particular self-explanation questions that we've given them to try to direct their attention at what's going on in the problem is still better than them just trying to solve the problem on their own.
I think as well, I love the fact how you changed it so it was clear, this is wrong. Why? Because when I started coming up with reasoning questions a number of years ago, I would do it wrong, but say, what do you think of this pupil's answer? Not this pupil's answer's wrong. So you're actually taking away the time spent looking for, well, is it right or wrong? They know it's wrong, right? I've got to find a problem.
Correct, yes.
And what you said earlier about directing the attention to what you need it to be. And look at the second question there as well, just making connections in maths, that idea of just checking as well your answer, such an important skill, not one always practiced. But again, that's clearly thought out by a mathematics educator, let's put it that way.
Yes, that's the goal, is that for each of the items within these assignments that we're targeting a specific concept, misconception, skill. We're really trying to isolate that and not overburden the student with too many different pieces that they need to attend to in any particular problem. So we really want to make sure that we're guiding their attention to the really critical piece and having them focus on it, having them practice what they need to practice in order to develop that skill. And then, moving on, the next one will be something else. But in the meantime, they have the chance to practice that skill on their own. Do
you find that, I mean, for the quick, why is Marvin's work incorrect? Do you ever come across pupils who have got to be trained from just writing, well, it should have been 9?
So it is interesting, and it's funny. Allie and I, every now and then, when we look back at the Algebra by Example materials, we see ways that we would do it better now. And in fact, we're looking for opportunities to update some of these materials, but to make the questions even more specific, to try to help guide the students' attention to exactly where we want them to be looking. Largely, I think that even a little bit of preparation by the teacher about, to try to answer those kinds of questions and ask for specifics would solve that problem.
Yeah.
But even getting them thinking about it in the first place and why it should have been 9, those activities can help overall them develop their conceptual understanding and be better prepared to learn.
And so, I mean, the question doesn't say what is the right answer. You actually explicitly haven't asked for that. The answer,
correct,
is
and
that
is actually another important thing. When we've done some textbook analysis, and now we're talking 5-10 years ago, so hopefully some of this has changed. And when I look at my daughter's textbooks, I think sometimes that some of it has changed here in the US. When incorrect examples were given, it was almost always in a sense of, is this right or wrong? Like that evaluation piece that we're taking out of the equation, or just correct it, find the right answer. And we try very hard not to go to that as one of the prompts, because they're going to get practice to solve the problem on their own later. That's not what we want to emphasize here. We're not talking about how to get the correct answer. We're talking about, we really want you to isolate what's going on in the problem that makes the choice of procedure correct or incorrect.
Brilliant. Should we see the next questions just below? Because I mean, we're talking one-step equations here. So I think I saw on the top right, it says 1 and 2 steps. So yes, we move on to some of the 2-step ones. That's interesting. So looking at the example here, Mackenzie, again, I like every time you said that, you said fictitious character, just to make clear.
Absolutely. There's actually some work on that as well. Obviously students studying their own errors would be helpful as well, but there are reasons why including fictitious student errors is even better. One of them is that you can put whatever errors in front of them. You're not limited to what they would have come up with. So you can give them a lot more manifestations of the misconceptions than they would have necessarily put on paper themselves, and have them consider it and work with it and learn from it. And then 2, again, I'm not exactly sure how it might be different in the UK, but in the US, there's definitely hesitation to calling out attention to somebody's wrong answers. I know that there are a number of countries, particularly in East Asia, where that's a natural part of the classroom. And hey, I think it would be great if it was a natural part of classroom activities for us. But as it stands right now, teachers generally shy away from those kinds of opportunities that might inadvertently shame the student or make the student feel bad about themselves, and then be focusing on that shame or that bad feeling instead of the content. So introducing fictitious student errors allows that.
So going back to this, I think I heard a whole chapter on it. And that's about pupil-teacher relationships. And I watched a trainee today, actually, because I teach the teachers, and he looked at the pupil's answer on the whiteboard, and I thought, oh, he's missed it. It's a mistake. And it was such a lovely mistake. It was a wonderful misconception. I thought this is a great conversation piece. And I was like, oh, I haven't taught. He's my trainee teacher. I hope he's doing it well. And he waited a short while. So clearly it wasn't that pupil. And then he went to the board and said, okay, this could be an answer, couldn't it? Didn't point out who the pupil was, didn't make it humiliating for them in any way. And I don't think the relationship we got with them anyway, I think it would have been okay. But he just waited long enough to then put it on the board and say, well, what do you think of this? Because is it right? And there was a lovely answer from a pupil in the back. Well, you can see their logic, but they've got it wrong because. And they would thrive with these questions, as a matter of fact. I think that I really think they would. I think I was going to make mention, you mentioned worked examples, and the option here to show the correct ones and the incorrect ones has more power, I think, than sometimes we realize. Just even talking about what method you use, method selection. Now, would you have done it a different way, for example?
And sometimes we do that with the correct examples. We'll show the right way and then say, hey, if Eliza had done it this way, would that still have been correct? Why, what would have been different if she tried this? And sometimes those are the target of that item might be emphasizing flexibility in mathematical thinking so that they realize that there are multiple ways to solve a problem. Other times it may be targeting a misconception where some students might have thought to do it that way, and you want to use the opportunity to say, oh yeah, I see how that's different from the correct process and why it shouldn't be used here.
From your position or from your experience, what kind of problems may arise in the classroom with these? I imagine initially trying to get the pupils to have those conversations, trying to lose the focus of, I don't want the answer. You've been taught that maths is about the answer, but it's not. The method is more important to us because then you can apply it in different situations. Apart from those barriers, if you've managed to get past those, are there other situations that come up where you'd say they're not being used effectively in the classroom?
So I would say that one of them is, and it's not really specific to these resources, but one of my favorite books to read, which you might try if you haven't after you finish Joe Bowler's book, is Dan Willingham's Why Don't Children Like School?
Well, the new one's out soon, isn't it? The new one's out next month.
The second edition is coming out next month. Yes,
exactly.
I love that, and I've done book club readings with groups of principals in different districts to discuss that and how that fits in with student thinking and cognition. But the moral of the story, that as it pertains to this, is that students don't necessarily want to think. And so these assignments are geared, in particular, the examples are geared to make them think. Like, that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to guide their thinking, make them think deeply about the content. Sometimes students don't necessarily want to do that. So, sometimes we'll see that they'll try to skip the examples and just go solve the problem because that's easy. That's what they know how to do. This is what really counts anyway. And for that matter, again, not sure if you have the same problems in the UK, but if these were used as homework, you could have the same situation where parents would look at this and say, well, we didn't have to do anything like this. What's really important is being able to solve this problem. So that's what you should really focus on. So I think that the trick then is maybe helping the students to understand that there is a lot of value in studying the examples and taking the time to answer, or at least consider, the self-explanation prompts, so that they can gain those extra benefits that we know are important beyond just trying to solve a problem by yourself.
I'm thrown by your remark about the parents, actually, because parents, it was okay for them, so why can't we just do the same years later? Yes, that's definitely happening here, and I can assure you of that. The Dan Willingham, I've just moved house, and what I always do is when it's mentioned, I'd grab a sticker that's on my wall and I'd hold it up saying memory is the residue of thought. It's about making them think, as you've just said. They've got to think about the activity, not just work through the questions, working on them. So with variation theory, where each one, is there a relationship? Look for the mathematical structure. Look for, what if I change this? And so you absolutely make them think, quite frankly, as opposed to just repeating, as you said, a rule. But you don't have to actually engage the brain to do that. You just have to do a task over and over. And who's to say it's going to stick? Memory is the residue of thought. Make them think. We talked a little bit about how it can be used. You suggested a homework, actually. Now, I know I saw on the website, but maybe we could talk about it a little bit here, and maybe we could demonstrate if we'd find it where it is. So I don't know if we could do that, Ali, if there's anything that I know it's on there. It talks through different usages of the website, so of the tasks. I remember finding that on the
website. It's on the websites, and it's the same for both MathByExample and Algebra by Example, but this is actually in the workbooks, in the MathByExample workbooks for the teacher, and it talks through all the different types of uses, or even some suggestions, which is of course just the beginning of how these can be used. So
yeah, we've had teachers work on them, have students work on them in centers, have them work on them in small groups, have them work on them by themselves. It could be an exit ticket. It could be a review. We've had some where we have particular, standardized tests that the students have to take in different states. Teachers might pull some of these to use as review whenever they're trying to make sure that students don't have these lingering misconceptions going into high stakes tests. They're really, the sky's the limit. We are encourage flexibility and creativity in deciding how it will work for different individual teachers in their classrooms. That's the key. We don't want to be super prescriptive. We want the teachers to be able to think about how this would be useful for their students and to put it in that context however they want. I will say that in our own work, the one thing that we don't do is give it as homework, but that's only because we are very interested in seeing the students' processes whenever when we examine the work that they're doing, and oftentimes homework doesn't come back. So teachers may find that it's more than fine because they'll do the homework, they'll learn from it, and that's all they're hoping to get from it. But for our studies, that's the one thing that we don't have the students do, and that's only so that we can make sure we're getting the process data back and can see what the students are really doing.
And that's why teachers will never be made redundant. As much as people think artificial intelligence could take over, it's the response to the pupils and the conversation we can have and think, oh, you've responded to it that way. I had an amazing misconception. I've been teaching 10 years that I've never seen before. We looked at, I think it was 3b squared, and it was substituting the b for a 5. And I said, well, it's only the b that's squared because it was 3b without brackets. And I think it came up with, well, it was 15 squared. Why is it not the 5 that's squared? Why is it the whole of 15? And I've never heard that before. I'm not sure if that's very clear without making that verbal. In a classroom, I'd have written that. So cognitive load and dual coding, etc. I'm not sure if I've failed here, but I just not come across that before. And having that do that at home, you miss out on those conversations, the chance to explain why that's a misconception. We're looking at the website now, and I think it's going to be important because that's the point of doing this online. So we can go and click on the website straight away. So typing into Google or other search engines are available. Algebra by example or math by example, as you've referenced. There's 2 areas. Can we have a look at just the website, what people can download? Because there is a huge area of algebra that you've used, isn't there?
Yeah, so we have 2 different websites for each of the programs, primarily because they were developed at 2 separate times through different grants, but also because they are more for different ages of kids. So Algebra by Example is for students who are in algebra, but again, we've seen them be successfully used with other grades of students, either pre-algebra or even in higher level mathematics, doing that formative assessment to see where students are to correct some potentially common errors or misconceptions that they still have. Same thing for Math by Example. We designed these for 4th and 5th grades, aligned to 4th and 5th grade standards in the United States, but we've seen both 3rd grade teachers use them as extensions and middle grades teachers use them throughout middle school grades as well, because a lot of those misconceptions and errors that students continue to make are rooted in 4th and 5th grade mathematics. So we have them on 2 different websites, and you can go ahead and download them direct from our websites. They're totally free to download. And what you'll end up with, so you can download these free materials here and you'll be brought to our download center. What you'll end up with is a list of both assignments and workbooks that you can download and print and distribute for non-commercial purposes for your own use. So here's an example of the workbook that you can download that has all of, this is actually the teacher edition, that has all of the, my computer's not keeping up with me as I share my screen, but has all of the assignments along with the answer keys, along with the targets. Same thing for
the teacher notes. Okay.
Yeah. So each student workbook comes along with teacher notes. The teacher notes for Math by Example are a little bit more comprehensive than the teacher notes for Algebra by Example, just because we created them a little bit more recently and we're able to learn from our prior experiences. But yeah, these have the teacher notes for all of the sample responses for the questions, along with the answers, as well as the targets. So these have the learning targets as well as the targeted error if applicable. So yeah, you can download these by the workbook or just by individual assignments. Again, like the workbook has all of the assignments that are aligned throughout the year, but that by no means you have to use all of them. They are specifically designed for you to pick and choose, reorder them in whatever way you teach the content in your classroom, compile different ones from 4th and 5th grade and make your own workbook. It's totally fine. You can do whatever you want with them to fit whatever you're covering.
I know. Pardon me, Ali. Do continue.
No. So same thing for algebra. You would get the full algebra workbook that has all of the Algebra by Example assignments in them, or any individual assignment as well. So we have 42 assignments for Algebra by Example, and almost 70 for each 4th grade, and another 70 for 5th grade.
Now, this is where, of course, the translation of when we teach what and etc. So it's not going to correlate. So could we look at, I know through the website, I've seen a page where it shows all these different topics. So
Yes.
I think we were watching this, you'd want to see that list. So I know I found that through, as you say, you can do one big download, or if you know that you're teaching one-step equations, like I was this week, I actually went straight to the one-step equations. Irritating I didn't get to the task I wanted to use, that task you shared actually. But that's I'm doing that as a starter next week. So this is the slide.
So yeah, here's the list for Algebra by Example topics. We've learned, especially since these were developed in 2010, 2011, 2012, that these are more often aligned to earlier grades mathematics, or at least in terms of what is considered earlier grades in the US. But again, they are really still very helpful for students who are entering algebra, especially as Julie said, we've seen the biggest impacts with students who in the lower half of the performance distribution. So reviewing these earlier topics and combating those common misconceptions and errors is really important. And then for 4th and 5th grade, those look a little bit different. Let me see if it's in here. I'm going to try to scroll back to the topic list for 4th grade. It's, yeah, multiplying multi-digit numbers, multiplication and division, fractions, and decimals, and a little bit of geometry. And that's pretty similar across the 4th and 5th grade mathematics.
So the math by example isn't just number then. I think I'd almost narrowed it down to being algebra and math being number, but it looks like there's geometry in there as well. Fascinating.
Yep. Yep.
Yes, they're designed to cover the entire span of the content included in 4th grade Common Core standards in the US or 5th grade Common Core standards in the US. It actually could be pretty interesting to see how that maps on to when things are taught in the UK and elsewhere. But as you've said before, math is math, or maths is maths.
It's
and
maths. I knew this was going to come up, and I'm going to point out it is maths. But I'm not gonna mention it again.
I'll work on it. We need to make it maths by example to
yes,
really insert a little S for the version.
That's me being I am who I am. I can't think what I was going to. You throw me about the maths, I think now. So I know you'd said about the usage before we started recording that obviously this is fit to the American curriculum, but actually there's a growing number of people using this already in the UK.
Indeed. Looking at our website analytics and download analytics, the UK is actually the 2nd biggest downloader behind the US in terms of both downloads and the widespread nature across the UK, so which is really interesting.
Misconceptions is, I think we're growing, we're learning more about, well, education is more of a research-led profession, I think, than ever before. And we're designing our lessons knowing more about cognitive science and knowing more about metacognition. But the knowledge of misconceptions, what I actually think this has real power for is either trainee or inexperienced or converter teachers who are changing their subjects. These pull out the misconceptions that you might think, well, don't you just do this to solve the question? Looking at these, I think it's actually a really good task to develop the teachers as well. Make them aware of the misconceptions before they happen is so powerful as a teacher. So even if you don't, some people might not be seeing not be able to think, I can take this and use it because of how they do their lessons currently. But you can learn about misconceptions from this, especially. I think there's value for the teacher development.
Absolutely agree. I think, and it's funny, I would say it's not limited to teachers. I have a friend that asked to use it because she was studying for her GRE school test to get into graduate school here in the US. And there's a quantitative portion of it. And she wanted to brush up on algebra and went through the whole curriculum to sort of identify her own misconceptions and try to correct them. But we find that there's a lot that the teachers can benefit from. So you're absolutely right. If somebody is starting from scratch, switching subjects or whatever, changing grade levels, etc., this could be a great resource for them to see what kinds of content misconceptions their students might have, what they might themselves be bringing in so that they can correct them and be able to teach the students. But and one important thing that I don't think we've mentioned yet is that these are developed in very close partnership with acting teachers, with in-service teachers. So we're not presuming that we have all of the knowledge about what the misconceptions are and what students are thinking. We love to work very closely with teachers and try to pull that information out of them. Oftentimes they think that they don't have something to contribute. We'll start a collaboration and try to get their take on what they can contribute to the study, and they'll think it's, well, what do you do if there's a fire drill and we have to stop the lesson or something? But we gradually pull out of them that no, you are with the students on a daily basis. You see these misconceptions, whether they're happening all of the time or whether there are different ones that are happening. How your students are going to interpret the question and whether that's really going to get them thinking about what we want them to think about. So we really encourage the teachers we work with to tear these apart. These have gone through so many rounds of revisions to get to the point of being published online for free. And the credit goes to the teachers that we've worked with for making sure that they are as aligned as possible to what would actually be going on in the classrooms.
And even simple things in terms of the design have changed significantly in response to teacher feedback. For example, when we shifted from Algebra by Example to Math by Example, Algebra by Example was done with 4 sets of problems for every assignment. And then we did the same thing for Math by Example, and the teacher said, no, this is not going to work. This takes all class period. So we switched the assignments to just have 2 sets of problems for students and to have more space. So even visual features and the use of how the assignments are broken up significantly changed during the research and development phase when they're initially created. So hopefully by the time that they're put online, which Algebra by Example and Math by Example are at this point, they've really been vetted and gone through many times by different teachers in different districts and instructional coaches, administrators, etc., to hopefully be really useful for anyone going forward. But that being said, even if teachers see something like the use of models, if they don't use tape diagrams or something in their classroom, either they see it as a benefit to add to their instruction by seeing some of these assignments and want to integrate them, or they can skip them and there's nothing being lost because it's not a comprehensive curriculum.
I see you talked about how it's been built over time, and there's a lesson there, and research shows it about collaborative lesson design, that you start with something based on good research, and you're using plenty of good research as to what we're doing here, acknowledging mistakes, metacognition of them, representation just here. You try it, can we make it better? We try it, we make it better. And there's a lesson to be remembered here when it comes to working in your departments, that this isn't, you've made something, but it doesn't actually mean it's complete. Because do you know what? When you use it in your school and you talk to your other staff, you might just say, I think we could ask a verbal question that would be really valuable after that. So you never get to the end of a resource, because there's always a way of going that a little bit further. So, I mean, there's clearly a lot of research behind their design. What about the results of them? Now, I'm hoping I'm putting something like there is some results here. What effects have you seen in schools that have been either anecdotal, qualitative or quantitative? What kind of results have you seen that when schools and pupils have been using these?
So Julie gets into the results, I just want to use this example to kind of conceptualize what was given in the research studies. So you see a worksheet like this. Again, worksheets, assignments, they're typical. Teachers and students are very accustomed to them. So they were used as replacement in our studies. But looking at an assignment like this and seeing how there are different problems here, we compared it to a group of classrooms using assignments that had that were solving all of these individual problems, the same exact problems, but they were solving each one. So going back to what Julie was saying originally, that this is really seen as kind of more productive practice. And even though students are solving fewer problems on their own, they're still exposed to the same number of problems. They're solving half the number of problems and analyzing the rest through worked examples. So the other half of the students that Julie will talk about in the research were solving k minus 6 equals 3, k plus 6 equals 3, okay, 6k equals 3, and doing just the problems like typical practice assignments you would.
So Algebra by Example was our first endeavor. And back in 2012, 2013, we completed a large-scale project that we had conducted with funding from the U.S. Department of Education to work with a number of classrooms. I think it ended up being about 500 students. I'm not remembering specifically, but it was a large number of classrooms that were then randomly assigned to either get all of the example-based worksheets or the problem-based versions of the worksheets, where just they would solve that problem instead of seeing an example. And we were really pleased with the results that we got. We saw gains on their conceptual understanding, which one would expect, right? Because these practice problems that are converted into examples are really targeting their conceptual understanding. So it's good that they're improving their understanding of the concepts. But we also saw gains on their ability to solve the problems, which, if you think about it, is counterintuitive. They're solving half of the problems compared with the control kids, right? They did half the practice. They did something else for the other half of it, and they still made gains, bigger gains on solving the practice problems. And then, again, I know that it varies from country to country, but in the US, there's still a large emphasis placed on standardized testing and trying to be able to show gains on those, whether you like them or not, that schools are sort of beholden to them. And so we also showed that by using items that had been released from those kinds of tests, there was a large gain for the students who had experienced the Algebra by Example content, and as opposed to the typical practice worksheets. So we saw gains across a couple of different kinds of mathematics learning. And we also, in Algebra by Example, saw, as Allie sort of referred to earlier, that in particular with the conceptual understanding, we changed the trajectory of the students who struggle. So if you think about, if you mapped out a student's learning or across your classroom from the beginning of the end of the school year, you would expect that the students that started the school year at the low end of the classroom would probably end at the low end of the classroom. They're probably not going to jump over their peers. And the kids that start really high and get the strongest scores at the beginning of the year are probably going to be the ones that are getting the strongest scores at the end of the year. And that changed with Algebra by Example. For the student, that was exactly what it looked like for the control group that had the practice problems like traditional. But for students who got Algebra by Example, the students who started the year at the low end jumped significantly and surpassed some of their peers in understanding. And so it was less predictive. It wasn't so set that if you start out the year struggling, you're going to end the year struggling. These students were able to make bigger gains and change their trajectory going into future math lessons.
And that just shuts down that, and again, I know this is Bowler, but that you can and can't do maths. Those at the bottom are staying at the bottom. There's plenty of research that says about if you are in bottom set, you stay there. If you have that setting, and I'm not saying an advocate for mixed attainment, everyone can have their own arguments about it, but it's that ability that we can change our trajectory. And conceptual understanding is now AO1. It's fluency here in the UK in our GCSEs. Reasoning, and this task is reasoning. It's perfect reasoning, and that's AO2. The ability to conjecture, to discuss, to reason, to logic. That's why I think these have such value to us. Before we'd, again, over email, we'd said there'd be a few examples we'd looked at. We haven't just looked at the algebra ones. I think there's a math one that's you wanted. I said math.
We're having a bad influence on you.
A math one that I know you wanted to show. So this was it. So I'm pleased we've seen. Well, there's a great example there, isn't it, with the bar model. Where that misconception comes from. Why did you want to talk about this one, though?
We wanted to show that again, based on the content standards in the US, but I assume similar in the UK, especially with these foundational years where they're learning a lot of the content that they need to build on in order to study higher mathematics. The use of models and the use of diagrams and number lines, et cetera, are really critical to helping support the students' conceptual understanding, which is, again, a big focus for us. So we incorporate a lot of those different kinds of models into the examples. And again, if the students aren't familiar with particular models, the teacher can decide not to use that one or what have you. But there's a big emphasis in the US over using a large variety of models. And so we wanted to make sure that we gave the students the opportunity to not just think about somebody solving a numerical problem and having a misconception about it, that students can have misconceptions about using these models And that's just as critical to try to combat as they're moving forward. So trying to help them see how other students might misinterpret a model and then correct that misconception, that misunderstanding, so that they can use them correctly going forward.
How interesting that we know that, I mean, bar modeling, it does two things. It helps encourage conceptual understanding, but it's also used as a tool to solve problems, and it has that double-edged usage. And we've got to make sure that they do it properly.
We have to make sure that they're understanding what they're seeing, right? Because a tool is not useful if it's not if they can't comprehend it. It's, you know, it's no more help than not giving them the tool in the first place.
And do you know what? Maybe that's a way. I mean, if you were to do Algebra by Example again now, that would be the addition which teachers can bring in themselves if they've been using things like algebra tiles or bar modeling for solving equations. That's the way to supplement it further, saying, well, if you're not sure, draw the model.
Yeah.
Draw the model. And so how nice that you brought it into these. That's fantastic. Is there anything else that we feel we haven't seen? Because obviously we've seen that we've shown the range of topics that are in Math by Example and Algebra by Example. We've shown the progression that it's gone on to, and the thought process behind how it could be used and whatnot. Is there anything else you feel that we should be seeing before I ask you about maybe other resources in my closing questions, if you like?
If I could just tell you a little bit about the results that we're finding on Math by Example, where, you know, probably, maybe not surprising, but we're finding very similar results in that they're effective overall for the students. We're not seeing as much of, we're not seeing that kind of trajectory change where it's benefiting all of the students. It's not especially benefiting the lower end students, which makes sense because this is grade level content, whereas the Algebra by Example is often targeting misconceptions that developed in earlier courses. So we're not seeing those kinds of.
Oh, the gap isn't as wide.
The gap, yeah, right. We're not seeing that. Yes, okay. We're not seeing that at this point. But one of the interesting things we are seeing is that for the first time, we're seeing some impacts of dosage. So you think about dosage in terms of medicine, but dosage in terms of any kind of intervention. How much of this are they getting? Are they getting one assignment? Are they getting 50 assignments? And so we're seeing that in particular in our fourth grade materials in the US, students who got more of the Math by Example assignments, that impacted their learning more than if they got fewer of the Math by Example assignments, or if they got control assignments. So if they got those problem-based assignments, more didn't help. More practice of more of the same didn't impact their learning, but more of our Math by Example assignments did. So that's sort of an exciting endeavor for us to look into and to try to understand sort of how much needs to happen in the classroom to have a benefit. These are all future questions. And I also wanted to put a quick note in that if you are interested in this, stay tuned, because we are going through that very detailed process of working with teachers, trying things out in classrooms, making revisions, now with Geometry by Example, which we hope to be able to make available within the next couple of years. So, you know, the work continues, and we're trying to bring this technique to as many areas of the content as possible, because there are very different challenges depending on what the particular content is.
And this whole series has been about the fact that there are all these resources online that we can use freely, and the important part of all of them, of course, and why I enjoy the conversation, is to discuss why they're made and how they should be used and how they can be beneficial. So it's nice to know that you're continuing to do that, to make them available as well. And going on to geometry, the curriculum might not be the same.
Correct. But the math is the same. The maths are the same. Okay.
Oh, yuck. Is there anything, apologies if that is rude. I hope it's not, but apologies if it is. Is there anything else that we feel we want to be sharing from the website before I give you my final questions?
Yeah, Tom, there was just one other thing that I know that you mentioned earlier as a piece of interest. And one of the beautiful things about these assignments is that they don't really require training or extensive knowledge to pick up and use, because they're assignments, because they're worksheets. Anyone can pick them up and use them. There is no training associated with them. So you don't really have to do anything different in order to be able to pick up and use these whenever you want. Because of course they are a little bit different than what students might otherwise see in other math assignments. It obviously would be helpful to kind of just walk through as an introduction. Okay, you're going to analyze this work, you're going to answer these questions, then you're going to practice on your own, and you have to answer the questions. You can't just skip to the practice on your own. And in the beginning of each of the workbooks, there is a walkthrough for students somewhere. I just had it up, just a page that kind of describes for students what the process is. And then on our Math by Example website, actually, there is a video intro for students as well that teachers can make use of if they would find that beneficial as well. So if the teachers don't want to go through it, or they just want a reminder for students to be able to pick up and use whenever they need to, if they're completing them at home or showing them to parents how to do these assignments at home, there is this video intro for students as well.
And that's really important. It's the kind of thing as well, when if you're rushed for time in lessons that we often are, oh, I won't show them the introduction. Show the introduction, because there's no point having something that has such power, but you only get 50% of its power without them seeing what the point of it is. And I think the hardest problem when I've tried these a couple of times has been, I just want to answer it, sir. That's not what I want from you. I won't achieve what I needed to achieve. And then you try and tell them the cognitive science to show that you look intelligent at the front of the classroom. But the time taken to introduce these, go slow to go fast later on. Take the time, whilst I see you advise 15 to 20 minutes for these assignments, take 40 over the first one. That's fine. Then it'll take 30, then it'll be, and so on and so forth. Thank you to both of you, thank you not only for taking the time over this, and I've got final questions in a moment, but thank you for making these readily available. And I first came across them, and I always grab the book at the same time when I mention it. Don't tell me I can't find the book when I've said it. Here we go, with Emma McRae's Making Every Math Lesson Count. I know she was a big advocate of this, and I'm sure the reason we probably know about it in the UK is her work, actually. However, what I do have to do is ask something this doesn't always work very well, but I need to see if it's translated across the Atlantic. That when I was creating this series, I messaged Emma McGuire and asked for a name, and we were talking about what I wanted to achieve from it. And I had this silly idea of no textbook required, where I've taken myself and I've covered a famous album from the 80s. Do you recognize the album? No one ever did. Fine, no jacket required, hence no textbook required, whatever. Well, I don't know why. I just should drop it. I think I enjoy humiliating myself. But what are your favorite online resources and why? So is there an online resource that you feel that you each, I think Allie had something, but I think Julie had a different answer. So yes. Allie, I think if you want to share screen, there was something that you were willing to share in this.
Of course. Yeah, I mean, just generally, because we are designing these to kind of work with everything, we don't have our feet in everything. I'm not comfortable with necessarily endorsing various things just because I'm not familiar with them. But I have heard a lot of really good things about Dan Meyer's blog, which might be of interest to people. This is blog.mrmeyer.com. Lots of really good, helpful ideas and contributions that just wanted to share.
So we've got a Google page here at the moment. Sorry, so which one are we looking at for Dan Mcguire? Pardon me, because I can see a Google page where you've got Dan Mcguire group. Is there somewhere in a direction we should be going?
No, it's just like a really helpful blog, and he shares a lot of really interesting math ideas.
But that isn't what we're seeing.
Yeah, we're seeing.
Oh, sorry.
We're seeing.
Sorry.
You've Googled Dan Mcguire education.
Sorry, I know. Sorry, I did this other.
That's fine. I'm not going to edit this out. I'm going to leave that in.
I've shared the wrong screen.
Because we learn from mistakes.
There you go.
There we go. That's much better.
There's Mr. Meyer. I thought you said Dan Meyer, and then you got Daniel Mcguire.
Yes. Well, Dan Mcguire actually does also do another thing, but he has a lot of open up resources that are available. And I was trying to quickly look for his website, but I couldn't find it very quickly.
Dan Meyer did a good TED talk, didn't he? About, and I remember him, I think it was a physics textbook he talked through, where he pointed out that you could answer all the questions just by following the procedure. And it more or less told you in the example this is what you do. And if you just copy it, all you're doing is repeating what we've just done 10 times. I've used that talk in various CPDs, but do you know what I've never got around to doing? Looking at his blog. So thank you for sharing that, because yeah. I didn't know it existed. I've been aware of the talk, but never gone back to it. So his website, sorry, it is just to challenge your thinking of mathematics education.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Julie, I know you said you didn't want to share a resource, but for good reason.
Yes, so I wanted to take the opportunity because I am a teacher educator too. So I am affiliated with Temple University. I'm actually the deputy dean of the college, and so I oversee teacher education and all of the different kinds of programs. But a big part of what we do is preparing teachers. And what we have come to discover is that there are resources everywhere. Teachers here, and probably the same in the UK, will find things on Pinterest, will find things on Facebook, share different groups. There are resources all over the place. Some of them are great, some of them are not so great. And what I want to advocate for, and is the same thing that I advocate for with our teacher candidates, which is that the most important thing is the lens you look at, the lens you use as a teacher when you look at those materials, at any resource, whether it's the resource Allie just shared, something else from this blog, and really focus, and instead of on what it says it helps students learn, really stop and think about, what would my students be thinking about if they were looking at this resource? What is it that this would focus their attention on? And this goes back to what we talked about with memory being the residue of thought. That thought is critical. You have to be paying attention to what the students would be thinking about, not just what you want them to learn. You need to make sure that what they're thinking about is actually contributing to what you want them to learn. So I'll give an example that we use often in teacher preparation. It's like you can download any number of pre-generated lesson plans for teaching things in science or math or any content area. And it will usually say in the US which content standard it's applying to. So some teachers might just think, oh, great, that's the content standard I need to teach today. But the lesson itself may be focusing students' attention on something that's fun rather than the to be learned content. Maybe all of a sudden, like, all of the focus is on colors or on plants growing and the hands-on opportunities. If those hands-on opportunities are there just to be fun and they aren't actually really targeting the to be learned content, what it is you want your students to be thinking about, think about taking that out and redesigning it. You are not limited to what the resource on the web says, and looking at everything with a critical eye and saying, how could I adapt this? How could I make this better for my students or in general? Could I ask these additional questions? Could I take out this part? Is this worksheet too distracting? Are there too many other things on this page that the core of it's great, but I need to get rid of these pictures of bunnies because that's just drawing their attention from the really important thing? And that's something that we do in our methods, in our pedagogy classes at Temple now, is focus on having students take a lesson that they find on Pinterest or that the instructor finds on Pinterest and say, let's talk about how to make this better. What are the students really thinking about if they're doing this lesson? And what do we want them to be thinking about? And how do we better align that? So, there's a lot out there. But look at it with a critical eye. You can make anything useful for yourself in the classroom by thinking about how the students would be engaging with it and what they'd actually be taking from it.
And do the work, because that's how you think about what have I got to think whilst by doing this myself. Oh, I had to do that. Well, that's the same pattern of thought that is pattern behavior, or things I've got to consider whilst doing the activity. Craig Barton's a big guy over here, and I don't know if I'm hoping he's made his way that way. In fact, there's an American edition of this, isn't there? So I know he has, but he wrote the same, something very similar. I think that changed him, which made him start working on research, was when he taught something. I can't remember the whole story. I always think about Jaffa Cake because I use Jaffa Cakes. I don't know if you know what Jaffa Cakes are, but how to teach probability, and I eat the Jaffa Cakes. But they better learn about probability. And he said about, he bumped into a student many years later, and he said, "Oh, you're that teacher who did that fun lesson with the cakes, I think it was." And he said, "Do you remember what the lesson with the maths was?" And the kid's like, "Nah." And so you suddenly realise, you know what? the fun can be had in different ways, with problem solving, with discussion, with a nice attitude, and a personality in the classroom. Task design, you've been talking about a lot, and that's something I've been thinking more in the last 6 to 12 months, and a lovely book by Mark McCourt and Chris McGrain in an earlier episode of ResourceFULL, actually, and another earlier episode of ResourceFULL. So I've enjoyed the series very much, and Julie, what you just said actually is a perfect way to end. Take the time to look at any resource before you use it. Think about what the pupils are going to go through that experience with them as well to be prepared for your lesson. There is, Tom Frankham said this, I believe, there's no such thing as a good resource. And I would agree with that entirely, because if you don't know how to use it, it doesn't have the impact it necessarily has. This, however, has huge potential to be a huge impact in classrooms. So MathByExample and AlgebraByExample, I'm glad we've managed to organise this. It took us a year, but it was completely and utterly worth it. Julie and Ali, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and thank you for your patience.
It was well worth it. Thank you.